Hey folks, it's Brittany here. Just decided I want to make a video a little bit about this whole discourse. I'm sure part of it's the algorithm throwing more of this into my feed because I have engaged on the subject, but I really need folks to understand why trans people are so concerned about the positions that are potential candidates for president in a few years are already starting to stake out. Um, we've had, between Gavin Newsom, Rahm Emanuel, and now Pete Buttigieg, we have three guys who've made it clear they're somewhat backing off of the idea that trans people deserve full protection and equality and to live fully in society and have all the same opportunities as any other American. They're backing off, they're agreeing to the manufactured right-wing talking points that trans women are a threat to women's sports. There's no data that backs this up. It's not even a new issue. Trans women have been competing in women's sports for literally almost 50 years at this point. Renee Richards won the right in court in 1977 to compete as a trans woman in the women's tennis events as a professional. All right. This 50 years ago, this was already handled. In the time that trans care, gender affirming care has been available to young people, we've had now rules and policies in place in like the NCAA, the International Olympic Committee, the US Olympic Committee for 20 plus years. And in all those years, not a single trans woman dominated at any sport. Only a handful ever even won anything. Like, minuscule. And out of thousands of events. And since trans people make up about 1% of the population, in those 20 years of being allowed to compete, you would expect we should have a few victories, maybe up to as many as 1% of competitions should have been won by trans people, right? Like, if we're about 1% of the population, you would expect, there should be about 1% of us that sometimes win things. But the numbers don't even bear that out. It's like literally like one in thousands of events where we get victories. And we shouldn't have to lose. Like, that's a whole other deal. Like, if we're allowed to compete, we should also be allowed to win. All we're asking for as trans people is to literally have the same rights and opportunities as every other American. We just want to be able to live our lives authentically and openly and be accepted. That's it. We're not trying to trick anybody. We're not trying to hurt anybody. We're not trying to take away positions from anybody. And what folks, I think, also really don't understand is that this whole issue was drummed up starting in 2019 by a group of far-right Christian nationalist activists who were mad that they were losing on gay marriage and that the American people had moved on and were no longer offended by gay marriage. And they needed a new wedge issue, and they were like, trans kids. People don't understand this. We can freak them out. We got to protect the kids. And they're even quoted as saying, well, we're starting with kids now because that's where the consensus is, and then we'll move on to adults. So understand, that is where all of these talking points about us being a threat to sports and our, gender affirming care for kids being mutilation, all this outrageous rhetoric stems from that group of people in 2019 finding a new enemy to pick on. And so when we hear people like Pete Buttigieg or Gavin Newsom accepting those talking points that were created by those Christian nationalists, we have good reason to be concerned. Okay, this is not being made up. This is real. And, on top of that, if they can make us be defined by our sex at birth in sports, right? If it matters there, okay, well then what's to legally stop that precedent from now being used to say, oh, well, Brittany's not legally a woman for sports, so she's not legally a woman to go use the women's restroom anymore or the women's locker room. And you think that's far off? It's not, because the Supreme Court in the United Kingdom, who, a lot of our legal precedent follows British law, common law, they have recently ruled that trans women are not women and trans men are not men. And they have created a ruling that has now been used, even by organizations it didn't apply to suddenly change their definitions and create new policies of exclusion. And so we've seen trans rights in the UK go really far backward. In the US, I said on a thread yesterday, we've taken 5 steps forward in my lifetime and 3 steps back, and our feet are still moving backward. And so when a politician who might be asking for me to support them in 2 or 3 years for president wants to adopt language that I know will be used to take my rights away, yeah, I'm going to be upset about that. I'm not canceling him. I like Pete. I think he has a good heart. I think he's wrong on this issue. He's being advised poorly. And I hope he'll listen to us, because what he's pushing is unworkable. He said a lot. Let's start off. First, I got to critique his, oh, well, we got to have compassion for trans people and what they're going through. Motherfucker, I don't want your compassion. I want my equal rights. Okay? I don't need a pity party. Don't pity me. Trans people don't want your pity. We want to be treated equally in society. So stop the condescending, oh, we got to treat it with compassion. That's just to make liberals who are transphobic feel better about their transphobia than that they are being compassionate. It's not compassionate to say, oh, let's have compassion, and by the way, I won't support federal action to uphold your rights. We'll leave it to school boards. What happens when we leave it to school boards? Do you think school boards aren't political? Some of the biggest political fights we've had in the last 5 years have been in school board races where Moms for Liberty has astroturfed the shit out of the field and taken control of school boards. Even here in Minnesota, they've taken control of school boards. So then what you end up with, you don't even have states' rights at that point. You have zip code rights. And you'd have a patchwork of zip codes within states where these kids in this zip code go to this school and they do have a right to play. And then, every other zip code around them doesn't. And so you'd have little islands where they're allowed to play. But then what happens? Well, at least some kids are allowed to play. We got that. But then what happens? Because those schools all have to play each other. What happened this last year when universities in Idaho and Utah wanted to make political hay out of the fact that San Jose State had a player that people believed to be trans? She was trans. She wasn't necessarily out. But they found, people found out they had a trans player. They didn't know. She played for 2 years without anybody saying anything. But then once it came out that she was trans, suddenly governors in these red states were like, let's make political hay out of this, ordered their schools in Idaho and Utah to forfeit matches against San Jose State. So, the young women who were playing on these college teams didn't get the full benefit of their, playing year because they were forfeiting games that they were supposed to be playing that hurt their record, their overall team record. It was bad for everybody. And so now you want to import that kind of nonsense into middle schools and high schools to where you're going to have middle schools and high schools forfeiting games because one school might have a trans player or that one school has a trans inclusive policy. Like, it's not workable. Fundamental rights can't be left up to local school board decision making. It's a fundamental right to be treated equally and live fully and participate in society. And we need Democratic candidates who will just say that. I'm a lifelong Democrat, or at least adult life. Sorry, I grew up in a conservative household and thought I was a Republican when I was younger. I've been campaigning for Democratic candidates since 2008, volunteering to knock doors. I have managed campaigns for candidates. I've been a Democratic candidate for office myself. Like, I care a lot about the Democratic Party, and I care a lot about fighting fascism and stopping this crazy fascist regime. But agreeing with them on their fascism is not going to help us. That doesn't win us anything. And if that's, I can't deny that some trans people I've seen have said, if that's our choice, then why would we even vote at all? That won't be my position. If I have to campaign for imperfect Pete down the road, I will. But what do I say to those trans people who are like, well, why should I even fucking vote? Because they're right. Why? If they're going to just have no rights either way, what's fundamentally different? So don't leave us behind. And stop calling us, woke scolds or far lefties. I'm a moderate liberal. I'm not a far lefty. Anyone who fucking knows me knows I'm not far left. This is not about left, right. These are fundamental American freedom issues. The right to fully participate in society as equals. That's it. And if we can't even get politicians who are trying to stake out ground for a 2028 presidential run to be able to agree with something as basic and fundamentally American as everyone having the same rights and opportunities, then what are we even doing? What are we even trying to save? I've had so many other liberals telling me to shut up and not talk about this, and I'm costing us an election. It's 3 years away. We're not costing any election here. We're asking people to step up and do better and fight for America and our rights and our values. And I can't just let it go when somebody is making it clear they're taking a step back from that. They're learning the wrong lessons from 2024. Kamala didn't win because Democrats had gone too far on trans rights. That was a right-wing talking point. Trans people didn't make sports the issue. We didn't. It wasn't us. We already had policies in place that allowed inclusion. There was no fight for us on this end anymore. That was pretty much handled. Like I said, this had been handled for years. And so when I hear people like Pete, who's supposed to be so smart and so eloquent, use the language he did, I know he chose that language. He chose it carefully, and it tells me the consultant class does not get it, and they're missing the mark on this. Listen to us. we're not being hysterical. This is real. We are watching our sisters and brothers in the UK lose their rights by the minute. And we're watching our brothers and sisters and kids here in America losing their rights by the minute. And yet you just want to say, well, we're just complicated and nuanced and oh, pity, compassion, but no actual rights. I'm sorry, I'm not going to shut up. I believe in liberal democracy, and in a liberal democracy, constituents are allowed to speak up and criticize. And I'm going to keep doing it. If you don't like it, too bad, so sad. Anyway, Pete, Gavin, Rom, all of you, do better. And if not, and if you don't, and if you end up not being able to win over votes from my community, don't blame us. You have only yourselves to look at. Thanks.